I want to welcome you to the CMO Scoop. I'm your host, Lara August. I'm the CEO of Robot Creative. We've worked with thousands of what we call very large, small businesses. So we write marketing plans, provide marketing leadership to companies on a part-time basis. So those consultants are called fractional CMOs or chief marketing officers. We have a team of talented directors and a growing network of CMOs that we place with clients, and each of them brings their own unique background and perspective to the table. So I wanted to take advantage of that. Every month, I have a conversation with one of our CMOs or directors, and we cover topics and recurring themes that we see going on in businesses that we work with. And today, we're talking about what makes a great logo. And my esteemed guest is Andrew Watson. He is the director of branding here at Robot Creative. So just to start with a little bit of background, Andrew and I have worked together for about 20 years, over 20 at this point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I started Robot about 28 years ago, it was purely a design firm. That was our focus. Throughout the years, we have added marketing. We acquired a web design firm. We've added advertising. Obviously, 28 years is a long time. So we've seen the internet come into being. We've seen, social media come into being. And so we've added services to support these large, small businesses over the years. But design and branding were my background, and they really are one of my passions. And want to start out with that. And Andrew, can you talk for a minute about your education and background and finding your way to Robot and branding?
Yeah, sure. Well, hello, everybody. So I started as a business major in college, and as most people do, when they're first starting college, they end up switching their majors because it's like, oh, I thought I was going to like this, but then I didn't. Because actually, what did I take? Like statistics, that was a requirement for a business. I'm like, nope, this is not it. And so I ended up switching my major to art. And everything about it just resonated with me. And it's like, okay, I know I'm in the right place. And so that kind of like evolved into, I had a concentration actually in photography and art and fine art. And then outside of college, I kind of got more into like the printing world and design. And I ended up actually opening a design and art gallery studio. And that's actually where I met Lara. And so we kind of started hanging out. This was probably in like 1997?
Eight, somewhere, yes, right in that range.
Something like that. And so I was doing a lot of, we were doing kind of like freelance type of design and everything like that. And then abruptly, I ended up moving to Portland, Oregon for about 5 years. But I always kept in touch with Lara when I was there. And then I ended up moving back here to San Antonio, and just Lara was like, hey, do you want to work at Robot? I'm like, sure, that sounds awesome. And 21 years later, still here.
Must be working for you.
Must be.
So we just released a book of logos yesterday. My camera might be a little bit blurry with the focus. We both have them. Yay. So we are celebrating all of the logos that we designed in our first 25 years of business. So we've got 180 logos in this book, and it's a huge milestone for us. And Andrew, how did it feel finding and organizing all of these into one book?
Well, there's two things. The finding was a very interesting one because, as Lara mentioned, we've been around for a while, and some of these logos that were designed were not really in a quite findable place or on, for those that are older, on.
Are you saying I'm disorganized?
No, it's not that. It's the technology and the evolution of it, but just getting some of these from a zip drive or whatever it was a little challenging. So, but other than that, I mean, it was super awesome to really kind of like compile all of these. And, I've been a part of so many of these as well. So it was really like this interesting timeline, a little nostalgia kind of going in there, but then also just look at all of these, and you could see the trends, and it's like, oh, when we used to kind of do a little bit more like that, and so it's really a great, exercise in just kind of seeing not only like longevity, but trends and kind of where we've gone and where we've been, and where we're going, all these type of things. So it was really cool to kind of compile all of those and see how they kind of look together.
Yeah. And Zari will put a link to the book, the page on our website in the chat, and you'll see there's probably about 4 logos, 3 to 4 logos, mostly 4 logos per page. There's a couple of big spreads where we'll show a brand application. But we could not have put these logos in order chronologically if we had tried, because we were pulling them from all of these different sources and the dates may or may not have been accurate. We've changed accounting systems and project management systems probably 3 times in the course of the past 25 years. So it was a labor of love, and we wish we could have put them maybe in chronological order, but we kind of grouped them more thematically. So you can read a little bit more about the book if you're interested in purchasing one. They're online, but we're here more to just talk to you about logos. 25 years is a really long time, so we both have a very long view on this, and we're probably going to talk about evolution more than a few times. One of the first things I want to start to talk about is the technical requirements of a logo. So we think that there's some really hard and fast rules that you really need to follow when you're designing a logo. And to dig into this, I want to start the conversation where we started. And did I mention that we're old? So we had very old school rules to operate with because digital presses hadn't been invented yet. So the presses used actual physical plates that were etched, and the press operators mixed ink on glass tables. So there were a lot of challenges associated with that. And that's where kind of the rules started. So Andrew, if you want to talk about like what we had to deal with, back then and what the rules were for logo design and the limitations.
Sure, sure. And so, as Laura mentioned, the color-wise, when we were first starting out, there were some pretty good rules to where it's just like, 1, 2 color. I mean, like 3 was pushing it. I mean, like you were like almost there's like a disclaimer, like, hey, can we get more colors in there? It's like you can, but like it was this ominous warning, type thing. And so most of the logos, and it's really kind of like solid logo design anyways, but it was pretty simple in terms of colors. From a technical standpoint, you typically didn't want colors to touch because there's something, they don't do this as much now, but like something called trapping within printing where there has to be a very slight overlap. And so as you can imagine, a logo being scaled down very small, like a business card, that becomes very minute in detail, and sometimes you'll get misregistration or what have you. So there was things of that nature that you just kind of didn't even want to get into.
Because they would, just to explain for anybody that's not ancient like us. So, they would run there's rubber plates or different types of plates that would be used, but they would run one color would go through one drum on the printer, and then they would go to the next color, which is another drum. And so getting the paper to go through at exactly the right place so that these colors would align was actually super challenging. So yes, they would print 3 color for you, but the costs would go up tremendously. So so most of the logos when we started needed to be no more than 2 color, or we had to really get a commitment from somebody if they wanted 3, which is crazy. We would also make sure that they were really strong in black and white, because there were still so many things that were, again, dating us, being faxed and photocopied.
Yeah.
And if you had a logo that relied on the colors to communicate something, it was going to fail in those types of applications. So faxes and photocopying.
Machines, yeah.
Yeah. So it was like minimal colors, very, very strong in black and white, or a 1 color version. And we didn't have any kind of transparency whatsoever. That was not a thing.
That was a total no-no.
Yeah, logos had to be incredibly solid. And then they could have some intricacy and some detail. But they had to still be readable and reproducible in all of the different. I think then we were more concerned with size because the technical requirements were so locked down anyway with the minimal colors and everything that it was just, can we print it on a business card? Can it blow up to a billboard? Like,
can you embroider it?
yes, that was a big deal. Somebody wants it on their shirt or on their hat. Is it something that can be embroidered? That was a big one. So, that's kind of where we started, and so much has changed. So we were able to see digital technology and digital printing evolve, and that's given us tons of flexibilities. Okay, so here's an example of, solid in one color. Maybe additional colors would add something to it, but they aren't really necessary to communicate what's being communicated there. This is meditation for and wellness for business groups, or they would use HR, human resources departments as kind of the target audience to sell wellness services into corporate environments. The next one, so here's a 2-color logo, so definitely gives it a little bit more pop. You can see that those colors aren't anywhere near each other. There's quite a bit of space. They're not touching or anything. So it's very safe to print that kind of logo. And then this one, I remember when we did this, it was, are you sure? Do you really want 3 colors? It's going to be a lot more expensive for your signs. And again, we work with small businesses. Not that it doesn't cost exponentially more if you're a larger business. Actually, some of the larger businesses limit themselves to 1 color, or did very much so back then.
More volume to print.
So you're kind of seeing an evolution just in, 1 color to 2 color to 3 color. And now, though, Andrew, if you want to talk about where we're at with logos today.
Yeah, and so as technology has changed, that certainly has opened up a lot more freedom and flexibility for logo designers and designers in general. And so this is a logo we did for the KBC in Houston, and it's a somewhat of like an event center type thing. And so there was the event, and even the like interior and everything, it had so much like vibrancy and liveliness, and so we wanted to communicate that within the logo. And so this is an abstract version of like the exterior of the building, but really bringing in these colors and this transparency to really kind of give it some volume and some layering. And so that was possible to do now. And there's several colors in here. Like, this is certainly not adhering to 3 colors or what have you. There's several colors, but with digital technology, printing wise, you can do even like small quantities, and you can do transparencies, and even like embroidery. Like years ago, you would take something like this to an embroiderer, and they just like kick you out.
They would just put the KBC on it.
And so, but this is all possible now in this digital advanced world that we have.
And here's another example.
Yeah, Santikos Entertainment. And so this was it was originally more of like a theater, but then it turned more into this entertainment venue with excitement, and it was actually a rebranding because they actually switched their business model. But we wanted to communicate this excitement and light, because so much of their business really is predicated on light and projection and everything like that, and this sense of excitement. And so we were able to do something like that for this logo. And one of the interesting things here also is the context that this logo would actually be in a lot of times was in projections on movie screens and everything like that. And so we wanted to make sure that it also looked good on dark or black. And I think we have a slide, the next slide, you can kind of see what that looks like. Yeah, and so giving that illumination to the logo design just helped it out and was really what it needed, as opposed to more of a flat design. Now anytime we do something like this with gradients or transparencies, there's always additional alternate versions for certain mediums that just literally cannot produce something like this. And so that's always part of it. It's not just kind of like, here's your logo and good luck with it, type thing. But the advances in technology, pretty much you can print this or reproduce this in almost any medium now.
Absolutely. And I think we've got one more kind of in this series, just kind of showing those gradients and things that would have been absolutely taboo back in the day, that can make a logo so dynamic and so interesting. And they work so well in the digital world and can even be embroidered. So it's been really fun to have kind of like permission to use those things as things have evolved. So that's very exciting. So in terms of technical requirements of a logo, you still have to be able to reproduce it very small and reproduce it very large. But now we have all of these digital channels. And so the logo requirements have in some ways opened up to allow gradients and transparency and things like that. But it has to now work good and work well in a digital format. It needs to work well, teeny weeny for, the favicon, in the URL bar and for social media channels, so it's much more common, I think, now to see logos that are even more simplified to be able to use in those types of, different tiny versions. But other than that, a lot of the rules have changed. So it's exciting. We live in a great evolving world. We're just dating ourselves and showing how old we are. But so another thing that's really important, I can try to stop sharing here. Another thing that's really important that we want to talk about is in terms of technical requirements. You just showed us Santikos. So it's got to work on a white background. It's got to work on a black background. So for every logo that we design, we always have detailed usage guidelines. And Andrew, can you talk to us what the usage guidelines should include?
Yeah, and so it's kind of like, okay, now I have a logo. It's real easy to mess that up, even though the logo is, you get files. But one common usage is to where it's like, okay, so I have this logo, and you have, as we mentioned, several types of the logo or versions of the logo. So there's like a reverse logo. There's sometimes like a simplified version of the logo, kind of like we mentioned for Santikos. And there's certain situations or applications where it's appropriate and where it's not appropriate. And so we literally will give like a guide, yes, no, type thing. And so the whole point is not to shame people, but it's to be consistent, right? And so like a super common example would be like if the logo has like blue type or whatever, and hey, I have this picture with this sky in the background with the logo in the corner, the blue type starts to blend in with the sky because, well, they're both blue. And so, you've got so many cooks in the kitchen a lot of times with companies to where it's like, hey, here's our logo, here's some interns, here's somebody in sales, and everybody's needs to really be aligned and on the same page so they know how to use the logo properly and which version of the logo to use properly. And there's also kind of like the, transparent versions, or, like a JPEG will have like a white border. So there's all those types of just kind of more technical things just to keep your logo looking like your logo. Another one that's pretty important that a lot of people don't think about is clear space. And so what clear space is, as it might suggest, it's the space around your logo that needs to be, well, clear to where, a lot of times somebody will maybe place a logo and then too close to other things, and it really disrupts the whole flow of the logo, and it just looks cramped, and the logo really can't visually breathe. And so we always provide like recommendations of kind of, there's basically two. There's a suggested, and then like recommended, and then there's kind of like a no man's land. So it's really just keeping the appropriate amount of space, and that applies to any kind of scale. So even if it's small, like you're applying it to a bunch of logos on a sheet with other sponsors or something like that, or you're scaling like a large billboard, don't get too close to the edge or don't get too close to the type. And so things of that nature, it just keeps everything consistent and reading how it should read, basically.
Yeah, logos need to breathe. They just need
Yeah.
that breathing room. So we have a blog that Andrew wrote actually a few years ago that seems to get the most play of anything that we've done on Reddit. You see designers sharing links to it back and forth to kind of explain how you determine what that clear space should be. So Zari, if you wouldn't mind putting the link in the chat, just if anybody wants, that for some reason that seems to be a tricky one and you want to learn more about clear space and how to set that up, I think that blog does a really good job of explaining it. So we want to make sure that the logo usage is documented really well. When you're sending a client logo files, Andrew, you're not sending them one file. How many different files are you sending them? Can you break down the different file types that we typically have? It's like a bunch.
It really is. It's honestly a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're not used to it. But that's why we also, in addition to all the different file types, we send like a folder where it's like most commonly used, and so that's kind of like the go-to.
The
But
JPEGs, right? The
right,
PNGs.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so there's the kind of like the industry standard type things. And so it's really kind of broken into two major categories. One is more vector based, which if you're not familiar with that, that's more to for like printing and scaling to where it's not pixel based basically. So you would want to use those for if you do a billboard or a mural or a sign or something like that, where that would be the appropriate type of file for like a commercial printer for that. And then there's more of the raster based ones, which are pixels. And so that's more like online email, social media type stuff. And so it's basically divided into those two, but there's like, EPS files, PDF files. Now there's SVG files more for like web based, which is it's not actually raster, so it's kind of like this hybrid. But then there's also kind of like the JPEGs and PNGs and things of that nature. So it's really kind of like the whatever you need, you're dangerous now, and you can go out and be empowered. But it is in a pretty extensive library. So when you have a vendor that you're dealing with, it's like, I need this for that. You should be able to accommodate any of their wishes, basically.
Definitely. Excellent. Kind of moving on. So we've seen a lot of changes over the years, not just to the technical changes, but also on the creative side. Oh my gosh. I mean, we both started before the internet and websites were really a thing, right? So I want to talk for a moment a little bit more about broader trends, and I want to try to find some slides to pull up for that also. Obviously, as we mentioned, traditional presses dictated most of the requirements when we started. And then digital printers came in and they were kind of the next big things. But it wasn't just the commercial printers. Literally, for the first time, people had them in their homes. They could print brochures in full color. Though brochures were also many times in one or two color. And so all of a sudden, everything became multicolor. Everything could sing and dance and had all of this vibrancy. But that didn't necessarily mean it was good. It just meant that we had access to color. And then we saw, the internet and everything that came with that. And there was a push to look more colorful and more modern. And modern meant swooshy for a while. So we would call it the age of the swoosh. And we even have some swooshy logos in our book that are kind of IT or technology focused. We can dig more into kind of that evolution. Andrew, if you want to walk us through some of these examples and some of the bigger, broader trends that we've seen over time.
So this hands-on logo, this is a pretty older logo. This predates me.
Yes, it's very old.
Yeah, and so there was earlier on, you'd had a lot more what we'll call kind of complexity or detail to where it almost like an illustration to where there was just a lot of detail kind of going on because there was almost this very literal interpretations like, oh, I have whatever it is, a plumbing business. And so literally like drawing out a plumbing situation or whatever to where it was just a very one-to-one detailed, very literal kind of, this is the type of company I have. I need a logo that represents that. And so it's just very literal, basically. And a lot of times a little, pretty detailed. where it almost looks, more like an illustration. And then on the opposite end here, you started to see this trend toward it started to get more simplified. And so we have this one for Cottonwood Aviation. And as you see, much more simple. This one, and a lot of the types of things we're talking about. This is two color and just a very clean, simple logo that you can see the contrast there basically of those two. The bottom one is kind of like the literal to abstract version. So this is Rebarber Commercial Bath and Sales installation, and literally those are bathroom stalls to where it's like, this is what we sell.
And there's the guy installing them too, right?
Right. So it's almost kind of like, why would we not show that, type thing? Sometimes it depends on the industry, but very literal interpretation of what they do there. And then to contrast that, there's the Ballet Conservatory of South Texas. And this was actually a little bit of a rebrand or a refresh to where they went from a very literal ballerina type thing and then going to something that felt at this time much more modern and abstract. And so you don't have to show a literal, in this case, ballerina in your logo. And so that worked out pretty well for that.
Absolutely.
And then there was the rise of, we'll call it the rise of flat design. And so, those of you that are old enough to remember, there was a time when everything was glowy and 3D and drop shadowy.
Drop shadows, yes. It was like word art. Think word art in logo format.
Yeah.
And that was probably from access to the digital printers, right? Everybody had home computers, everybody had digital printers. So they're giving everything a drop shadow.
And so you saw all of these very volumetric 3D looking logos, really. And so at some point, it kind of got to be too much. And these are all, trends, they go and they're cyclical. And so it was almost kind of like it was so much that there was this trend to go to flat design towards like, let's actually get rid of all of this. And so you got these really like flat colors that are easy to reproduce. It's easy to read at smaller, scales and everything like that. And so you really, and it's again, kind of what we kind of consider a little bit more solid logo design in general anyways. But there's definitely a huge trend where flat design kind of came into the fold here, to where it's just no shadows, no gradients, no anything like that.
Absolutely. And how about the bottom two, typography?
Yeah, then typography, because then it's like, well, do you have to have a separate logo mark? And so, as you see so much of these things, and this is how I think trends are kind of like born, to where everybody starts doing it and then it becomes less unique. And so it's like, how do I differentiate that or do something different? And so you would have these brands that really became, it's like, well, hey, the typography, because of the uniqueness of it, that is the logo, to where it almost wrecks it towards competing with it. If it's like, oh, let's put a separate little logo mark here or there, it's like, you don't need that, And so that Botanica one is a great example of that. Very, very unique typography, custom typography. This is not something, out of the box.
Yeah.
So that really made it a logo in itself. And then Paladin has a little bit of a graphic application to the P, of course, but still has a very unique look in itself. And so that's the logo.
Yeah, so highly customized typography. For Botanica, we didn't think there was any one flower that could represent a florist who does events and works with such a huge range of materials and different types of flowers. So it's definitely an interesting choice, and it probably was a backlash at the time to focus more on typography. So another thing, a lot of these logos that are in our book are clients where we also did the naming. We helped determine the name of the business, and I'll stop sharing for just a second. So the naming has also been that's had its own evolution, like naming businesses. And the biggest impact has simply been the internet and, the .coms and the .orgs and those, most coveted domains and just the limited availability of them. We saw, everyone racing to capture their trademarkable term. All of a sudden, the country and the world became accessible, and you needed to be concerned about other people using those same kinds of names. And then naming, once those were snatched up, naming became harder. It became much more abstract.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so those names would switch to compound words, made up words. They would focus on an attribute or a feeling. And so the marks, if it's a separate mark or even the typography, those kind of followed suit. They became more abstract. They became more focused on an attribute. So it's been a really interesting evolution that we've seen. I don't think there's anything wrong with going back to prior eras and using one of those styles if it's appropriate for the client. There are times where you might have a restaurant with a regional flair or a retro flair, or it could be any industry. It may be appropriate to reference some past style, but I think it really helps to study design and to study the history and evolution of it, so that if you're employing a device, you know why and what that might mean and how it fits into historical context. And I think that's particularly important with fonts. Like, there's a lot of people that don't realize where fonts came from, how they were introduced, what they meant at the time or what they were used for. So I think studying that can be really important. So some designers have a very specific style. This is worth mentioning, kind of like referencing the retro, flavor. There's a lot of that. Some designers will have a very specific style, and some clients will seek them out because of that style. And because they have a strong feeling that that style will work for their audience. That's not how we work at Robot. So we develop logos to fit the client's brand and appeal to their audience. So Andrew, how do you make sure a logo is going to resonate with an audience? Can you walk us through that kind of process?
Yeah, sure. And that's almost kind of like the question I get a lot is like, how do I know I'm going to like my logo? Because it's like, what we're selling is this kind of idea of something. It's not like, it's a product on the shelf and it's like, exactly what you're buying for this price. And so there's a process that we have, and it's a discovery process, and it's a research-based process to where we really need to understand your goals, basically, of kind of like who you are and what your business is about, and then also your audience, and really understanding who they are, because most times the client is not the audience. And so that's a huge, actually, like, we try to like weed it out very early on, because there's personal preferences that come into play here. And so, which really should not factor into a logo design, because you're designing for the audience, the intended audience. And so really understanding what they're looking for, but then also it's a combination of who you are as a company or organization and what those attributes might be, and looking at the competition, because you don't want to look too much like them and you want to differentiate. And so it's this almost kind of like juggling act between those types of things.
We do a lot of research, and we don't just do it internally. We don't just use it for our internal team to look at, to help get to know our customer and to help them kind of identify, for us and for them, to identify these personal preferences that they may have. I think going through the research and doing this step along with them, let me share this slide, is a really important step that Andrew touched on. And if you could just kind of walk us through this project and the research that we're showing here. This is just a tiny snippet of what we did for this project, I think. But if you could kind of walk us through how we do this and what you learned from it going through it with the client.
Sure. So this research was for the San Antonio Philharmonic. And so this is just the first slide of it. There's definitely more extensive, more granular research that we did, but we don't have time to go through all of that. So we'll just kind of go through this real quick. And so basically, that first top row there, so it's San Antonio Philharmonic. So these are what we'll call sort of competitors. It's not quite competitors in this industry, but with the whole purpose of like, let's just look at what the Dallas Symphony looks like, the Houston, the Austin Symphony, and then the San Antonio one was just an older one. And so basically, we just kind of want to see, there's no evaluation here. This is really just gathering information. It's like, what do they look like? Mainly it's like, we want to make sure we don't look too much like one of these for just pure confusion, right? But so it kind of gives us a little bit of a benchmark, like, okay, here's what the others are doing. And then we go and let's look at some other research here. And so as we're gathering research, we're also kind of notating some trends that we're seeing, and we're starting to formulate some recommendations basically. And so that row right below the top one, it's, we've got some of these, and these are all regional, like Texas ones. And so that's almost like, and we saw a whole lot of these, like it's almost like the first tier, to where it's like, okay, so all of these, there's like, I'm a symphony, so the obvious thing would be like, let's use an instrument or a treble clef or a note. And so you saw a whole lot of those that were out there. And so those typically were kind of like the smaller ones that might have been maybe done in-house or something. So there was a whole lot of those, very literal. And then that next row, there was an attempt to kind of like modernize those to where it's still the same general concept, where there's an instrument or a conductor or something like that. But you can see here, like the typography has changed a little bit. We've got more of these, sans serif fonts. And so it looks a little bit more modern than that other row, but still similar in concept. Now, the one all the way to the right, the Waco Symphony Orchestra, you're starting to see this trend now, like, hey, maybe we don't have to be so literal. Let's do some wispies. And, we talked a little bit about the wispies and the swooshies during a certain era. And so you started to see a lot of that kind of going on. And so then the bottom row, although some of these are what I would not call great logo designs. Actually, I would definitely say not great logo designs, but you'll see a shift here to where, hey, we are a symphony in, Louisville, in Corpus Christi, West Texas, Irving. How do we bring in a little bit of a sense of place? Because all these other ones that you see up here, that could be anywhere. You could put that little logo mark, the French horn or whatever, in Chicago, in, Florida, Miami, whatever, and it would all be the same. So the bottom row, there's an attempt to make it feel like, hey, this is what we have, because this is the Symphony of Louis. I guess there's a lake in Louisville, so there's like water ripples on the note. The Corpus Christi one, there's the clamshells. I think the West Texas one is a pretty nice logo, actually. So it's very simple, but if you've ever been to West Texas, it's windy.
It's a desert.
It's a desert, yeah. So the wind is whipping around. So it's like, hey, let's take a little bit of this region and mix it in with this kind of, symphonic wave. And so that's a nice kind of combination. And so the whole point of this first slide was really to kind of get on the same page, to where this is kind of what's been done. We probably are recommending to stay away from the super literal logos where it's a violin or something like that. And we really want to point you more towards doing something that has a sense of place. And so that was the first start of the research on that one.
Excellent. And so also, I just want to tie back in. When we go through this research, it's not internal. We do it with the client. And so we ask them, how do you feel about these different logo variations? And do you see why we're seeing these trends and how these things have evolved? And it's a really important meeting to get everybody on the same page, because they may have come in saying, we're going to need a violin, or we really want a music note, or we really have some specific ideas. And so this meeting is a great opportunity to help them detach from any really rigid requirements that they may have come in with. They don't all. Some people are very open-minded, but sometimes people come in with very rigid requirements that sometimes it's fine, but sometimes, we're like, I'm not so sure. And this research can be a great way to help them loosen up a little bit, and also to help sometimes you can ferret those things out. You can get a better understanding and start to guide them in a direction before you've actually put pen to paper. And I think Tangela is raising her hand. Do you have a question for us?
Yes, I do. I have a couple of questions if you all have a moment.
Sure.
Awesome. So the first question is, what are things to do in creating your logo and things to avoid?
I mean, some of the things that we talked about, especially like in this day and age, to where making sure that you can the scalability, like what a lot of the pitfalls I'll see with, I'll say like amateur, designers is there's too much detail going on, that trying to cram too much into a logo. Like now, like in this day and age, simplicity is really kind of key, to where you don't have to explain everything that a company or organization does in the logo. And so really just having a very clean, simple, concise logo that stands out, to where, again, that's why we do the research, to where it's super easy to create a logo that looks like everybody else in your industry or your competitors. So really just kind of looking at, my analogy is like, I like to do like a periscope, look around, see what's going on, because it really changes your view on things, to where you don't even realize sometimes, like, gosh, everybody is using that blue color that I wanted to use, but like people come to the same conclusions basically.
I've got another question. So just to sort of clarify your language, the question is asking, what do you mean less literal and more sense of place? What do you mean by those words, and why does abstract work better?
Yeah, so the literal interpretation would be like, okay, we're a symphony, so symphonies have instruments. Here's a violin, here's a harp, here's a note. So it's just the very, you know, literal interpretation of that, as opposed to like some of these bottom ones, like that West Texas. It's emotion. So it conjures a feeling of movement, and in this case, maybe music. So it's much more abstract than literal.
And how would you apply those same concepts for someone who's looking to make a logo? They're in property management and they were just thinking about a little house with a company name on it. And so, can you talk about that?
Property
Yeah.
management, construction, real estate, those are all real tricky because almost everyone has a house. I mean, I'll let you take this over, Andrew, but that
Yeah.
is very challenging.
Right. And there are going to be industries where it is just rampant with the same stuff. I always kind of talk about like a lawyer or attorney, where it's just like, okay, there's a gavel, there's a scales of justice and a column, or something like that. And so with real estate, and some of this, it's based on what is the name of the company, because if it's if there's a name that is, conducive for some kind of visual, that should inform what the logo could be. Because if it's like, um, you know, this would be a ridiculous name, but Blue Gorilla Real Estate,
That
then
conjures an image, right?
right,
It
there's
would be very
probably going to be
different.
a blue gorilla on a house, maybe. And so I'm guessing there's not going to be a lot of other of those. But if it's a little bit more of a, very kind of general, like, a, I don't know, like ABC real estate or something like that, it might be a little bit more difficult, or somebody's name,
Mhm.
Smith Real Estate. It's going to be a little bit more challenging. And so honestly, what we tend to do in those situations is like, well, let's talk about, how is your company or business different? Are you faster? What are some of these differentiators you have? Are you faster? Is it very people driven? Is it, whatever it is, that maybe that's something you can kind of pull from? Or even if it's like, we're very innovative in real estate, and so we use technology more, and so maybe that can bring in, so you're selecting typography that looks innovative, or things of that nature. So you're really kind of having to go a little bit outside of the literal in this case, to something that's more like an attribute.
Yeah, you have to. And so this takes a deep understanding of the client. You have to
Yeah.
really understand who their audience is, what's motivating. You have to really look into the competition. And we're about to dig into the competition a little bit deeper. So I do want to share just one more slide, that just to kind of wrap up on the Philharmonic. Andrew, could you talk about how we wound up here with the San Antonio
Yes.
Philharmonic?
Yes. And so from that research, and it was very extensive, this is the final logos, in this case for the San Antonio Philharmonic. And so what they wanted to convey basically, and so if you are familiar with San Antonio, it's a vibrant, culturally rich city. And so we wanted to get that, but also for the Philharmonic, and this has actually been a trend within a lot of this type of industry, is to be a lot more inclusive, to where a lot of these type of orchestras and things of that nature, there's been a little bit more of a history of this very elevated type of audience, but it's like, this needs to be more of a community.
Yeah, let's say elite, and then maybe too
Elite, yeah,
exclusive.
elitist. Yeah, kind of elitist. And so it needed to be a lot more approachable. And so, we chose, just from a very simplistic standpoint, like San Antonio's lowercase and this thin font. And so it felt, not as kind of like stuffy and, buttoned up and everything like that. And then the logo mark in itself, this is a bit of a representation. So there's, again, that vibrancy, this color palette feels very San Antonio, if you're, again, familiar with it. There's these rich colors, and like, as we did research, so much of these like more classic symphonies and philharmonics and orchestras, they were very like muted, black and white, almost, if you think of like an orchestra, it's like tuxedos, everybody's wearing. So we wanted something very different from that. And then abstractly, this is a little bit of a representation. It's a duality, to where from the top view, the single solid kind of circular point there in the middle is almost kind of like the conductor, and it's going out. And so it's almost kind of like this half moon or half circle of an orchestra, but then it's also this community kind of feel, like it's encompassing of like a community. So everything just kind of came together. And so again, we're doing the research, and we're making sure we don't look like the others, but then also really understanding who is this audience, who do we want to appeal to, and who are you as an organization, so we can make sure that all of these, again, it's the juggling act, to make sure that they all align and they communicate to where this was the goal of this project. And everybody was very happy with it, including us.
Yeah. And the shorter form, a lot of people outside of San Antonio don't realize that the people in San Antonio is a long word. It's a lot to write. So we refer to it as essay all the time. So in shorter form in writing, it's very common to abbreviate San Antonio essay and to use that. So we decided this is a very long, very horizontal logo. So in keeping with, again, like modern logo trends, it's perfectly acceptable and even encouraged to have different versions of logos. So we also have this short form that we can use in some places. So that was kind of our segment on research and how we use it, and how we use it to get closer to our clients, to understand them and their goals and their preconceived notions, and to guide them in the direction of something. But we do also want to talk about, how do you differentiate from the competition? So obviously the research is a really big part of that. So talk to us about how you feel this really addresses the competition and sets this company apart.
Yeah, so Papuli's Greek Grill, as it would suggest, it's a Greek restaurant. And so, as again, we're doing research, if you think about, a Greek restaurant, there's usually a pretty immediate kind of color palette that kind of comes to mind, and it's usually blue and white. And you could Google this, like Greek restaurant. There's going to be a page full of, the real common, there's the Blue Dome, and I think it's Santorini or something. But
yes,
it is rampant to where that's almost kind of like, it's a Greek restaurant. Well, we need to make it blue and white. And, and so with that in mind, of course, that's just going to blend in and just throw your logo in a hat and mix it around, and they're all the same. So almost like the challenge or the goal of this project was like, how do we not do that, but still say Greek restaurant? Because sure, you could hot pink, nobody's got hot pink. Well, that doesn't really say Greek restaurant either. So during this kind of process of research and discovery, we're looking at that. And so we've established, we do not want to do blue and white from just a color palette. standpoint. And so where these colors came from.
Well, and we also did the naming on this too. We had the opportunity, so that's just sneak that in there as well.
Yeah, and so Papuli in Greek means it's grandfather?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so grandfather. And so the owner of this was, hey, I've got a picture of my grandfather on a chair. And so this was such a family type of business. And so it resonated so much with not only the owner, but there's alignment here with an audience here to where this isn't a big chain, national chain. It's like we're taking these attributes like, okay, family, Greek restaurant, and bringing this all together. And
family
so
recipes. Yeah,
family recipes, exactly. And so this logo mark is a rendering from an old photograph of his grandfather on a chair. And so the name, everything kind of came together here. The color palette. So this was taken from a lot of the food. So like that olive green, the red in the tomatoes. And so it just came together to where, again, it was this Venn diagram of all these things kind of coming together. So looking at competition, really understanding the audience of what would resonate with them, and then also, of course, the business and what it needed. So it all kind of comes together here in a logo like this. And so that helped differentiate. I mean, still to this day, and this is, we did this 25 years.
It's been a while. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. And so it still very much is separated from this industry. You look at Greek restaurants, it stands out still.
Great. Thank you for walking us through all of that. So that is Papuli's, and just kind of thinking about, you deeply understand your audience. You found a way to differentiate from the competition. I think another really important is, how do you make a logo memorable? Because it's possible to make a logo that looks great, but you would never pick out of a stack again, or that doesn't really stick with you. If you want to talk through, Andrew, you pulled these examples specifically with name reinforcement and memorability in mind.
Yeah, and so the name reinforcement is super critical to where when you do have a name that is conducive for visuals, you really need to seize that opportunity to reinforce it. I mean, like Target or something like that, right? To where it is a Target. And so you remember that. And the common theme here is kind of simplicity, to where there's a name and there's a logo mark, and they're aligned, right? They're reinforced. And so we have a few examples here. So complete emergency care. And so this is one of those industries where it's a little challenging because it's like an urgent care type of business, and you see the same. There is a cross in all of these places in some capacity.
You need to see that from a distance and instantly know what it means.
There's some functionality, because we actually initially said, like, let's do something different to where everybody's got a cross. But then it just did not look like an emergency care. Like, it was like, this isn't going to work. So it's like, how can we make this still have a cross that's red? And we tried different colors. It's like, that doesn't look very emergency. So there were some kind of like check boxes where it's like, it has to have these or it doesn't work at all. And so with this name of complete, we have this very subtle completing arrow around it, and it's one of my favorite logos actually that we've done. And that one we feel is very memorable within this industry. Again, like, there's so much of the same stuff you see out there, and so this one felt very memorable. And then just subtle things of the O in the complete is a perfect circle, just kind of like the mark, and so everything was kind of harmonious with that one.
Well, I think also mentioning, we were involved in the naming on this project. When they first came to us, they were going to name the business Alamo Urgent Care. But after digging into their business goals and their future plans, they wanted to expand across the state and potentially out of state. And we said, well, Alamo is great, but like we have so many clients who have Alamo in their names. So that's a historically significant battle site here in San Antonio. And for those that may not know, but we've got pages and pages and pages of Alamo logos here. Yeah, here in San Antonio. So, with their goals in mind, we kind of suggested that they needed to do a naming project and that would give us the opportunity. And the Alamo also has a very distinct shape. So you almost have to start to put that into a logo if you use that name. So they were very receptive, after talking to them about their goals, to changing the name. And I can't believe we found Complete available. There was only one Complete emergency anything related, and it was in Complete, Alabama. And we didn't view that as like a huge competitor because it's a literal name of a place. So we decided that was going to work and be defensible in a larger regional context. So if you could just real quickly kind of highlight, skim over the other ones, because I want to make sure I keep us on time.
Yeah, so Sunjoy, again, we're kind of reinforcing here. It's this kind of like sun shape and this burst of that feels joyous, right? So that one was a very successful. Cyber Fortress. This is a little bit of a newer one, so we've got these gradients kind of going in there. But again, reinforcing this name. It's a fortress, but it's cyber, so you got the technology. And then Roof Sensor was actually a product. And so this is literally what the product looked like. And so anytime there's an opportunity to do that in a logo, it's super memorable because it not only reinforces the name, but it reinforces the actual product. And so that's what that one is.
Excellent. Okay, so I know we're already a few minutes over, so I am going to put a couple of summarizing thoughts in here, and then we'll stay on a little bit longer if you have any questions. We have one more segment that we would love to cover on hiring someone or finding the right person to do a logo design, so we'll mention that. But just in case some of you have to drop off, I want to thank you for joining us today. We will have Zari will put a link to a brief survey in the chat. So please take a moment to give us some feedback. And again, there's the link to the logo book, the Logo Needs Space blog. We also have a prior episode on branding, a more broad description of branding and what's entailed with that I did last month with our creative director, Belinda. And next month, our next live stream will be on Thursday, November 20th at noon here in Central Time in the United States. Marianne Schweers, who is one of our fractional CMOs, and I are going to be talking about channel sales strategies and how you can use that to help multiply your sales and marketing efforts. So you can follow us on Eventbrite for notifications about upcoming live episodes if you'd like to join and ask questions. Past episodes are also now available on YouTube. So Zari, if you wouldn't mind, we're just going to fill the chat with all the links. And so that everyone joining us knows, we don't have permission to message you outside of Eventbrite unless you opt in. So the best way to stay in touch is to join our mailing list. That way we can notify you of upcoming episodes, also give you access to other articles and tools and things that are not available through Eventbrite or this program. So you can get to our mailing list, sign up on the bottom of the homepage of our website, and we'll put a link to that in there. So thank you for joining us for this live recording of the CMO Scoop. And we'll just continue a little bit longer for anybody that wants to stay and talk about hiring or finding the right person. And then we'll answer some more questions if you guys have time. So in terms of hiring someone or finding the right person to do a logo design, I find it a little unbelievable that so many businesses think that you can just have a cousin, brother, nephew, in-house person, just someone just crank out a logo, right? That doesn't have any experience. And maybe after listening today, you'll get a handle on why. Like there's so much research, there's so much understanding the business, the audience, the competition, so much experience in terms of understanding the historical context of the design that you're using, of the fonts that you're using. But, I think that, we see a lot of pitfalls with people that are inexperienced logo designers. And Andrew, if you want to speak to maybe that for a minute, like how can you tell that somebody's an inexperienced logo designer? What do you see?
Well, I mean, and so, some of these things that we've talked about. And so a lot of times it's like cramming too much into a logo. Again, simplicity is kind of king here. That's kind of like a tip off. And then just like even like technical things of like spacing and alignment, there's like hierarchy to where, things just don't, there's not harmony to the logo. A lot of times when, when we're looking at logos and we're designing logos, there's shapes that kind of repeat, so like there's something like kind of like in that complete emergency care, the perfect circle part, it's in the fonts as well. So the selection of fonts and everything like that, it all kind of comes together, because sometimes I'll see these logos and they're done in a very kind of separate way. Like, I like this font, so I'm going to use this font. I like this color, but they don't really work together. So yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, you see a lot of personal preference that comes into play, and that can be a real mistake. In the same way that we see clients kind of asking for very specific things based on their personal ideas or preferences, we see a lot of junior designers that might do somewhat of the same thing. And I mean, you have to start somewhere, right? Like, not everybody starts with experience. Oh, yeah. So I don't want to dissuade anyone from becoming a logo designer, but if I'm a business wanting to hire someone for logo design, my recommendation would be to ask what their frequency is of designing logos. Like, how many logos have you designed and over what period of time? Because somebody that's designed 100 logos over the past few years is probably going to become pretty good at it pretty quickly. If they're digging in, doing the research, understanding the audience, understanding the competition, like any trade or craft, the more you practice, the better you get. So I think one of the challenges we see is, in particular, with in-house teams that get upset about their bosses hiring, an outside firm to do the branding, but the in-house teams rarely get the opportunity to do branding. Not that they're not great, talented individuals, but there are very few businesses where you're an in-house team and you're designing, a logo every week or every month. So it just doesn't happen at a frequency that would probably lead to them being very skilled at developing logos. So I would encourage anyone that's in-house not to get frustrated by an outside agency being employed. And I would encourage owners not to listen to the in-house team getting squawky about it. I feel like as the owner, you have to put on your owner hat sometimes, even if it's a little frustrating to people, and say, like, this is a really important project and we need to work with somebody that has the experience to really bring our brand to life. And that just has more experience doing that. I don't know if you have anything to add to just kind of what to look for in a designer.
Yeah, just being thoughtful that, I mean, so like, honestly, we mentioned it earlier on, to where there's designers that have a very specific style. And if that's a good fit for whatever your business is, that's perfectly fine. But there's, as it would suggest, it's a very narrow kind of, you're going to end up with something that doesn't strategically fit who you are and who you need to be, as a company. It doesn't represent your organization very well. So, yeah.
That's a good point. So if you're going to do, as a business, all of the audience research and competitive research, and then identify a designer that fits a style or a look and feel that makes sense, then that could work. Otherwise, you want to look at the portfolio and find a breadth and an expanse of different styles, and find a company that is a little bit more of a chameleon, right? That can really help fit the design to the business. So I think that's really good advice. And it all starts with a portfolio review, probably looking at the logos, but a logo isn't yes, it's a visual thing, but probably also talking to the past clients to find out, are those logos still in use? Were they happy with the process? Do they feel like it's still holding up and standing the test of time? So that would just be another way that you could validate or research and look into a company before you hire them to do a logo. Well, I think those are the main things that we wanted to cover. So many of you hung in there. So thank you for staying on. Does anybody have any final questions that you'd like to ask us? We're an open book. You can literally ask us anything.
Yeah, we do have a few more questions. So thank you for staying
awesome.
on. One question is, in the age of AI and so many platforms with freelance designers, how do I make sure that the logo I'm getting is defensible, unique, and not recycled?
That one is really tricky. So you can do a Google image search. And it depends. I don't know if this was somebody from the US or somebody from another country. I can speak very much so to what happens in the United States. You should try to trademark your logo. So, let the US trademark and patent attorney's office decide whether that's unique enough in your industry to stand alone. And you can't trademark currently anything that's AI generated, like for a logo for a business. So, the contract that you sign with a designer to create a logo for you should require that the work is original work and original art. And then going through the trademark process would help ensure that you're getting something that is truly unique and defensible in your industry. That's what defensibility is the ability to say, nobody else is allowed to use this. I've got my trademark stamp.
So our next question is, firstly, it's a thank you for all of the great information. And then how do you typically bring all of these different requirements together when designing a logo? Do you use a high-level model or framework to guide the process, something that helps structure the journey from strategy to final design? How do we put it all together?
Yeah, and I think that's a part of our process. It's really baked into there, and again, we've been doing it for a long time, and so that is like the big question. It was like, how do I know I'm going to like this? And so through this journey or through this process, there's a lot of what I call like kind of checkpoints to where we're a very collaborative organization. So that's not only internally but externally with our clients, and so we're showing them research, we're talking about it, we're getting feedback, we're filtering things out. And so there's really no like surprises along the way. And so it's really almost this sort of like cumulative stepping stones of kind of like, okay, we've gone here, we've identified we don't want anything like this. And so it's just this kind of like gradual, again, sort of like stepping stones to kind of get there. And so it all really kind of like makes sense when we get towards the end there to where, oh, I know why we chose those colors. I know why we're using these types of images. And so it's very process driven with a lot of flexibility along the way to experiment and be creative. So.
Yeah, we have a definite process. We use professional project management. We've done this 180 times at least over the past 25 years. So we have very specific phases that we work through. And as Andrew said, the client is involved in each of those phases. So we don't meet with the client once, gather some information about what they're looking for, and then go back in a vacuum and design these logos and then go, ta-da, and share 3 logos with them. I think your odds of success designing that way, there are lots of people that do it. But the stories that I hear from those designers are, oh yeah, the client didn't pick the right one, or, oh, they weren't happy with these. And like our batting average is ridiculous. They're always struggling to decide between the logos. We've never had anybody, I would be mortified if somebody saw our logos and, our presentation and thought, I really don't like any of these. Like that hasn't happened with us. And I believe it's because we walk them through, share the research, share the ideas, and kind of walk them through the process every step of the way. So that it costs more, it takes longer, but it ensures a better product at the end. So I would encourage you to try to include the client in the process, and I think that you'll find a much better outcome. I hope that helps.
Thank you. And this last question is a very random question for Andrew. So the attendee wants to know, have you ever come across a company called Rubber Stamp Madness?
Rubber Stamp Madness. That would be a no. I have never heard of Rubber Stamp Madness.
Okay.
Although that is a good name for a logo because it does conjure some visuals. So that's great.
Love it. Was that our last question, Tangela? I think it was, because she went offline. Okay, thank you all so much for joining us today. This recording will be emailed out within approximately like 5 to 10 days, I think. And then again, you can also follow us on YouTube, and all of our episodes are recorded there and you can view them. So thank you so much for joining us. And this was episode 6 of the CMO Scoop.